Hi, and welcome back to Sunshine State of Mind. I'm Vanessa Montgomery, and today we're going to be speaking to Natta Jain. So, to introduce Natta, she is originally from England, descending from a long line of magical practitioners, going back many generations in her family. Receiving her first tarot deck at 11 years old, Natta Jain has been dedicated to the mystical arts since a young child. As a professional astrologer, diviner, and mystical philosophy teacher, Natta Jain synthesizes her extensive knowledge of astrology, mythology, magic, mysticism, and fine art to create beautiful, empowering rituals, bewitching workshops, and enlightening personal forecasts. Natta Jain's focus is to help you reconnect to the magic in everyday life and the abundant gifts the universe has to offer. Her work helps to solidly ground you in the present, reminding you of your strengths and highlights opportunities ahead of you so you can clearly and confidently blaze a trail forward towards your shining destiny. So Natta Jain is a modern mystic and also practices witchcraft. And I've known Natta Jain for many years now, and I really wanted to share the Sagittarian / Scorpio vibes that you have, Natta, in that you're so broad with your study, but we'll get to that. So question one for you is, like any Sagittarius worth her salt, you have a lot of arrows to your mystical bow. You've been broad ranging in your quest for mystical and occult knowledge, and now bring those together while continuing your personal education and professional practice. You've got 4 planets in Sagittarius, the sign of preaching and teaching, with Scorpio ascendant, Moon, Venus, and Uranus.
Yeah, and Uranus.
And I would guess this combo is fueling your quest for the specific type of knowledge that you bring, which especially because you have an eye on the witchy. So let's go through a list of various types of divination that you have learned and also practice and teach. And also I'd love to know, what are your top 3 favorites?
Okay, great. All right. Well, good morning, my love.
Hi.
Good to see you.
You too.
And thank you for having me here today. So so divination has been something that has been a really major part of my life since I was very young. Obviously getting my tarot deck when I was 11, and it's always been part of my family, in one way or another. So and there's lots of different divination types that I love. Tarot is one of them, although I would say for me, I find tarot for me is more of a mystical system. It's so much more than divination. So I guess my top 3, I won't mention tarot as one of my top 3, even though it is a divination system, but I'll talk about that in a bit. But I'd say my top 3 is, one is I do something called Ornifermancy. Ornifermancy, yeah, and it's a little bit more unusual. And Ornifermancy is reading with feathers.
Wow, yes.
So yeah, so I've always loved birds since I was a little girl, one of my favourite sounds is the sound of wood pigeons from in my grandma's garden. So I was very close to my grandma. She was very mystical, and so birds have always been a huge part of my life. I paint them a lot, I draw them a lot, I spend a lot of time with birds. And so it was just a very sort of natural development for me to sort of mix that love of birds and divination together. And so Ornifermancy is very old, actually, reading with feathers. It goes back to sort of ancient Greek and ancient Roman times. And normally, traditionally, you would read in numerous different ways, bird feathers. So one would be to watch how the birds fly and what direction they're flying in and the sounds that they're making. Another way would be to put bird seed on the floor and watch them peck, and have a look at the signs and symbols that they would leave behind. Or you would make little alphabet letters, almost like a bit like a Ouija board almost, and they would have little alphabet letters, and you would see which ones they went to go and pick to spell out messages.
Yes.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. So and also the other type of Ornifermancy is reading with feathers, which is what I do. And so different feathers all have different symbolisms. So say, for example, this is an eagle feather.
Yep.
Here, beautiful eagle feather. And so if we think about eagle feathers, you know, they're apex predators. They're at the top of the food chain. So this is very much about the idea of sovereignty, the idea of having power. You know, eagles traditionally, you know, they've been used in a lot of regal banners because of that sense of power, that sense of regency that they bring. So this one is about power and strength. It's a really good one to see whenever I'm doing a reading for somebody. And it's ruled by the principle of the sun. So it's got a more solar quality to it. And if we think about the sun, it is that life-giving force, you know. So it's a raven feather. It's a very nice long one here. They're all quite different. You see, they're very different in shape and size. And ravens are very much related to the world of the occult and the darker realms of night and the kind of more shadow aspects. And they're related a lot to death, the life, death, rebirth cycle. So the different stages that we go throughout life. So they're very powerful cards, but they're basically about the idea of death and transformation and resurrection.
Yeah.
So
wow.
powerful. Little kookaburra feather here. I do like my Australiana, as I've lived here for such a long time. And kookaburra feathers, they're related, you know, because they've got that voice, that laughter. When it's their sound that they make is almost like laughter, isn't it? So they're very symbolic of the idea of this sense of finding that joy within ourselves. So they're very lovely. So there's lots of different feathers. So that's one way that I read.
I think that's so interesting because it's feathers as well. Like, it's very intriguing.
Yeah, it's not. I haven't actually come across anybody else who does it. It's a very, very old art.
Yeah,
so,
and that makes it really interesting too. It's ancient, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really, it's really interesting. In fact, there are so many. You know, normally when we think about divination these days, you know, we think about tarot, or we think about you know, maybe like a crystal ball, and you're scrying in a crystal ball. But there's hundreds of different types of ancient divination, and some of them are, you know, some of them are fabulous and fascinating that we can still do today. Some of them are probably somewhat unsavory that we wouldn't do today. So, like you know, for example, they used to read a lot through the entrails of animals and stuff like this. And no, thank you, I'm not going to do that. But then they have very funny ones as well. So there's divination with cheese, for example, in Europe, was very popular hundreds of years ago.
Work with what you got.
Right, yeah, and so exactly. So there's all sorts of wonderful types of divination. In ancient Rome, it's quite fascinating. They used to polish their nail. The priest would polish a neophyte, so a trainee's nail, until it was incredibly shiny. And then they would get this neophyte to drink, this trainee, to drink this concoction that made them a bit lucid. And they would retell the priest their lucid dreams that they were having, and then the priest would interpret them. So there's all sorts of weird and wonderful ways. Obviously, I don't do that either. I don't go around shining people's nails. But,
well, you could probably double up if you were a manicurist.
Probably you could. Absolutely. Yeah.
Multi-hyphen career right there. Yeah. And this is exactly why I wanted to share Natalie and her knowledge on Sunshine State of Mind, because we've talked before, and yeah, you've told me about all these weird and wonderful things. And even in the early days when I met you, you were talking about creating your own systems, and I hadn't thought of that, you know, and, you know, in a lot of ways, I do realize how everything's creation, and we're creating in the moment. You don't have to see how someone else has always done it. You can then take it to a next level or personalize it. And you were talking about, oh, I'm going to create this, you were saying you're going to put seaweed in the bathtub, in the water, and create your own system from that one. And it really got me thinking, about how... creative one can be. So that's why I guess there's been so many. It's like, as long as you've worked out what the meanings are, or allow your intuition to come through. So you've got this knowledge, and then you also understand that you can be the creator yourself. So what's your second favorite?
My second favorite is these are called Owen Sticks.
Owen Sticks.
So, yeah, Owen Sticks. So we've got two here. So these are both different types of wood. So they're from England. So they're not very well known here. But back home, this is a very traditional way of us doing divination. Back
Wow,
home,
yeah, I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, they're not. No, yeah, it's not very common here. And so they all mean different things. So this is very much related to Celtic mysticism. A lot of druids used to use these. It goes back to the first few centuries AD. So it's a very, very old and ancient way of doing readings. And so this is an alphabet, actually. I don't know if you can see that, but that's an alphabet that's been carved on here.
Oh, wow.
And so it's a very old, ancient alphabet. And so each alphabet is related to the properties of this tree. So for example, this is an elder tree.
Right, yeah.
And elder trees, they're very powerful. They're seen as very powerful back home. And elder trees are related to the idea of, if we talk about the idea of the Maiden Mother Crone, which we talk a lot about in witchcraft, and we talk about it a lot in goddess archetypes and worship, this sort of thing. And so this is related to the idea of the crone. So elder trees, you would never cut down an elder tree. And actually, to mention, all my feathers and all my sticks are ethically collected. There's no trees and no birds are hurt in the process. They're just found. And so this elder tree, you wouldn't want to cut it down, because it was always seen as a very sort of bad luck thing to do. But elder trees, they were traditionally, the twigs were collected and they were put on funeral pyres and stuff like this, because they're related to the underworld. So this is this very sort of shadow element, and this aspect of the dark energy, or Hecate, who is the goddess of the dark moon and also the goddess of witchcraft. So they're very strong in relation to that. And traditionally, these as well, these would be very heavily worshipped trees. You know, people would do entire rituals around them. So this is based a lot about Samhain, which is the witchcraft equivalent of Halloween. Basically, it's the same thing. It's just Halloween is a Christian term. It comes from Hallows Eve, and Samhain though, and so this is traditionally one of the trees at Samhain that you would put on your altar.
Right. Yeah.
This one, this is a Hawthorne tree, and Hawthorne. So I've got also what I should mention actually. So the reason why I chose these is because elder is related to our birthday time. So we have the same birthday.
Yeah.
And yay for us.
Oh yeah,
I'll
just explain that because I haven't yet. So Natalie and I are both Sun at 5 degrees Sagittarius, and it's funny they say, like in astrology, when you have planets that are the same as someone else's, they feel like you. So you feel like, oh, there's something really familiar about you. And as soon as I met Natalie, or you, Natalie, you know, I was just like, bang, and it's like, I've just really felt this amazing connection and feeling, and I've just put it down to we've got that same birthday, and we were introduced by a friend that collects Sagittarians, so a mutual friend, and she happened to have a collection of 28th of November born Sagittarians.
Yeah, so, we've always got a house on fire, haven't we? Yeah. So this is related to our birthday, which is why I picked this one. So that's from us. So so being born at this time of year, you know, it gives you what we would say is that other sight, or that aspect to be able to see beyond the veil, if you like.
Oh, so and we both love that.
Right? Yeah. So it's a very, you know, in some ways, even though it's related to our birthday, in some ways it has a little bit of a Scorpio energy to it as well, because it does actually span a little bit into the Scorpio period as well. But yeah, so that's us. This is a friend of mine who I've been speaking to, a lovely friend of mine called Witch Felice, who I've been speaking to pretty much every day, who's in India, who also is an amazing witch. We have a beautiful connection. And this is his birthday one here. And this is a hawthorn tree. And so hawthorn trees, in some ways, are quite the opposite to the elder. Because whilst the elder is about this idea that it's at the funeral, or it is this idea of going into the other realm, the hawthorn is very much, it's ritually used at Beltane, which is the festival of love, basically. So this is very much about love, it's about fertility, but it's also protection. So if we think about the hawthorn, they've got all those thorns there. So it's about love, it's about protection, but it's also about this idea of opening up our heart too. So it's a really, really beautiful one. It's a very powerful one to have. So this is definitely one of my favored systems. And the other thing about this is that all the interesting about Owen Sticks is that they are all related to all these different great spiritual lessons in life. And for the ancient sort of Britons and ancient Irish in particular, this was not just a system of divination, it was an alphabet, it was an entire spiritual doctrine, really. So if you imagine as we would have a Bible or a Torah or something like this, this was their version of it.
Right. And I guess that's a lot of these systems are much more holistic as well, which is something we don't really have these days. And because you live in Australia now and we have different species of trees, like, you know, gum trees specifically, have you extended your vocabulary of like Owen Sticks, and have you done any with, you know, gum trees and things like that?
Oh, you know, I haven't actually, funny you should mention, I haven't done that. But what I have done though is I have been collecting a lot of leaves. So I've got my gum leaves, I've got my waratah leaves, all this sort of a thing. So similar but different. I've kind of gone down more the leaf route.
Yeah,
with that one. So
I love it. Okay, so what is your third favorite divination system?
Okay. My third favorite divination system, actually I pulled a couple of these just before we did the reading just before we did the chat, and so my other divination system that I love, they're called Lenimond cards. So these ones, they're not always abstract, but I just happen to really love abstract art. So the ones that I've got are a little bit abstract here, if you can see those.
Abstract, yes.
They are, aren't they? Yeah. Yeah, so a lot of my tarot decks are quite abstract actually as well. But these are really lovely little cards, and initially they're about 200 years old, approximately 250 years old, and they're from France traditionally. And they're called Lenimond. They were said to be named after a lady called Madame Lenimond, but they were actually just a bit older than her, actually. It's just around about the same time, but she was a very, very famous lady who did divination in France at the time. And so they got named after her. Yeah. And this is a form of divination. So it's quite different to tarot. It works very differently. In many ways, it's a little bit similar to chess, funnily enough. So, you know, in chess, you know, there's a certain way in which we move our pieces. And so in this one, there's a certain way in which you read the cards that is almost like the way how you would read a chessboard almost, and the strategy involved in a chessboard, and having a look at it and planning out where your pieces can go. It's very similar to how you read these. It's quite fascinating. And all of these, they're based on the idea of playing cards initially. And they come initially, their origin is actually from a game that's played with cards initially. And then they started using cards as divination. A lot of gypsies, traditionally, you know, they didn't use tarot cards, they used playing cards. And so this is sort of almost like an offshoot, if you like.
Yeah, wow.
So these ones I've pulled here, this one is about two people as the significant, so it's your relationship with somebody else. And this one is about letters, so it's about sharing information. And this is what I pulled for us just before we started.
Oh my gosh!
I know, right?
Yep.
So
and we're talking about different languages, I suppose, too.
That's right. Yeah. And absolutely, it's different languages. And the thing is that we all, as much as we have, and this very much comes into tarot, is that as much as tarot is very much based on its artwork and very much based on the idea of this collective consciousness of how we identify with symbols, but at the same time we all have our own personal lexicon in our own head as well.
Right. Yeah.
And so that really comes into play too. So these are different in relation to tarot because there's a much more deeper, much more profound, sort of complex mystical system behind tarot, and a whole spiritual lineage behind that as well. Whereas this is a little bit more, it is more divination based. Whereas tarot is a little bit more, is a bit more broader in its context, if you like. This is a bit more like, it is what it is.
Specific, yeah.
It is, it's very specific. It is what it is. There's no mincing of words with these little ones. And often, they're quite fun. I mean, I find that all divination has a sense of humor almost.
Well, you have 4 planets in Sagittarius, so you would see the humor in it.
I do indeed, yeah. So it definitely has got a sense of humor. It's quite funny at times. So this is what I pulled today. Yeah. So
that's Natta Jain's top three favorites: the feathers, the sticks, and how do you say the cards? Because I've been saying Lenimond, but I think I've got it wrong. Lenimond. So yeah, Ornifermancy.
Yeah.
Feathers.
Ornifermancy, which is the feathers
and birds.
Lenimond, which is the cards. And they're always tiny little cards as well, because normally there's 36 cards in a Lenimond deck, so they're a little bit less than a normal playing card deck or a tarot deck that has 78. But they're a little bit smaller because in Lenimond, which is very common, is that you use all the cards in one reading. So you need them to be very small because you lay out these massive spreads.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Quite winky.
And the English-based Owen Sticks that remind me a lot of the runes.
Owen. Yeah, well, they are very, very similar to runes in many, many ways.
Yeah.
So
top 3. Thank you.
That's right.
So we're gonna pleasure. The multi-passionate, multi-hyphen life of a Sagittarius with strong Scorpio vibes. So question 2, do you remember the first time you became conscious that there's more than what our society teaches us, or were you introduced to that understanding by your family so it was natural to you? Like, do you remember that moment?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of both, really. I mean, my family have always been heavily involved in this sort of stuff. I mean, my dad was a Freemason, and on my mum's side, they're spiritualists. And like my grandma read tea leaves, and my great grandma was a medium, and she used to work for the spiritualist church holding seances. Which had a big crystal ball type of thing. So these are things that I've always grown up with. But on a very personal level, I very distinctly remember being about 5 years old, which is also when I got my first astrology book. But being obviously a very one for a child at that time though. I remember being about 5 years old, and I've always really loved nature and fruit in particular. I eat a lot of fruit. I enjoy fruit. Bear with me with this. It is going somewhere. So I enjoy fruit. And I just remember having this incredibly, as an adult, I would say it was like an epiphany or an illumination. And obviously, I'm not going to explain this now in childlike words. I'll explain it as an adult. But, if you can imagine a child imagining this, though, in the sort of vocabulary they would use. But I remember opening up this orange, and I used to eat a lot of oranges. I remember opening up this orange, and then suddenly, I was all by myself, and suddenly having this, being overcome by this feeling of like, oh my goodness, there there is this power, this greater power that is beyond us. There is this sense of divine, sort of greater cosmic consciousness.
Wow, an epiphany.
Yeah, right. I had a huge epiphany. Why? Because I noticed that when I was peeling this orange, an orange, I mean, this is the 5-year-old little mind I had, but the orange, it comes with its own natural wrapper in bite-sized pieces. And it blew my mind.
You had an orange epiphany.
Yeah. I had an orange epiphany. It totally blew my mind. And I was like, how is it possible? And then I went to a banana, and I was like, look at how comes with its own natural cover. There is, and it's natural. It's just from nature. There has to be an aspect of a greater divine order happening here.
Right, and like divine, some sort of intelligence behind all of this wrapping of food.
Right? Yeah. So I know that's incredibly bizarre, but yeah, that was such a huge thing for me. And funny enough, so oranges have always stayed a part of my spiritual practice, which I know sounds a little bit odd, but
I just have to interrupt here. And from my understanding, Sagittarius correlates with the color orange, so it's funny that.
Right. Well, that's true.
And even like Osho, he's so famous for having his followers were called the Orange People, and he's a Sagittarius. I'm like, of course they all wore orange and were called the Orange People. So you had your spiritual, what would you call that? Induction with an orange.
Induction, yeah, with an orange. And then years later, many, I mean, probably maybe about 10 years ago from now, something like this, I was about to go trekking with a friend in South America. And just prior to that, and I've never had this before in my life, but just prior to that, my toes hurt. And I don't know why, because I've never had a problem with my feet, but the little pads, and they looked pretty normal, but for whatever reason, the little pads on the bottom of my toes hurt a hell of a lot. And I went to all sorts of, I hadn't damaged them, I hadn't had an accident, I'm in good health. It was unexplainable. I went to all sorts of doctors, both Western and Eastern, natural and doctors and more sort of not natural doctors, and nobody knew what was wrong, and nobody could fix my toes. And then I was just like, Christ, I'm going trekking in a couple of weeks. I won't be able to do that. I really need to fix my toes. And then I went to this, it's going to sound really bizarre, but bear with me. I went to my friend's musical concert, and I'd never heard her cover a song before. And this musical concert was in a church, and I didn't even know she did covers of songs. I've only heard her do her stuff, her own music. And we were in this church, and then she started singing. And I was just sitting there and sort of thinking, okay, well, I don't normally come to church that often, but as I am here, could come on, JC, could you just give me a little bit of a sign? I really need some help with my toes. Could you please just give me a cue how I can fix them, please? And then honestly, as clear as we're talking now, I had this voice in my ear saying oranges and tea. It was just bizarre. And then my friend covered a song. As I said, I've never heard a cover of a song before, and it was a Leonard Cohen song, and it was about going down to the sea and going down to the river, and Jesus giving this girl oranges to eat to heal her health. I know. Yes. Oh so then in the interval in between her music, I thought, right, well, I'm definitely going to go and have a cup of tea. So I went and had a cup of tea, and then afterwards, the next day, I went to Coles, which is our supermarket for those of you who aren't from Australia. I went to Coles, the supermarket, and I thought, right, I'm gonna pick me an orange. So I rubbed my hands, and I was like, come on, I've had word from above that it's an orange that's going to heal me. And I put my hands out like this over the oranges, and everybody in the supermarket must have thought I was bananas. And I put my hands over these oranges, and then I found this particular orange, and I took it home, and the whole entire night, like all the way through the night until until past dawn, I did ritual and meditation and spell work with this orange. Eventually I went to sleep. In the morning, toes were completely healed.
Oh my
Boom,
gosh.
done.
You healed
Perfect.
yourself.
Right?
Yes.
So oranges are like so amazing and powerful in my life. Yeah.
Amazing. And I think, you know, Sag is so intuitive, Scorpio, moon and rising and everything is like open to that yin way. And I do think you do have Mars in Sagittarius conjunct Neptune, and that's such a like, you know, you do have a few stories where you've just followed this wispy path and it's worked, you know.
Yeah, well, I think that's
yin way.
definitely the Neptune. I think, you know, Neptune plays a lot to do with that. It's quite
Neptunian
prominent in my
story.
chart.
Yeah.
It is a very Neptunian story, isn't it? Absolutely, yeah. So that was pretty amazing. And when I was a kid, like I used to, with my grandma, I was getting back to birds again with my grandma. My grandma was very mystical, and we would go and collect bird feathers together back then, and birds' nests and stuff like that. And I'd make little potions and bury them in the garden. And I had a tiny little box under my bed when I was very, very small, that I collected all these like leaves and little trinkets and little odd random things that I would put in the box. And this would be my box of gods and goddesses from a very young age, you know. And whilst everybody else was taking comics to school, I was wanting to try and learn the Bible. So it was so it's always been something that's very powerful for me.
So a bit of both. You definitely had that openness from the family, which leads me to my next question. Actually, I could see and sense the rich lineage that does exist in England when I lived there for a while in the mid-90s, and it felt completely different to how it feels in Australia. I think in Australia, Westerners have been cut off from our heritage. A lot of us don't even know where we've come from. You know, I'll ask Australians, so what's your you know, background? And they'll say Australian, and I'm like, well, you're clearly not Aboriginal. What's your background? Where's your family come from? And they don't know. And you know, I'm a first generation on one side, second on the other from orphans. So we just don't know. So in England, you know, and that can be quite liberating in some ways as well. Like, we only have the future. So you hail from England, and it's got such a long history and herstory. And, you know, the roots of mystical understanding and practice are still connected, both energetically and in practice, like with your family. And can you share a little bit about your relationship with that as compared to your experience in Australia? Because as someone coming in here, you would probably really recognize that and sense that difference in feeling. I'm really curious to hear your take on it.
Sure. Okay. Well, I love England, and I love Australia. You know, I love both of them very, very dearly. And you know, because I live here in Australia, you know, for me, Australia is very much feels like home, basically. But you know, because I'm here, I still also feel this very strong root, like pull towards my roots, and that sense of ancestry within my family. And so I permanently I've got 3 altars that I have in my local house. And one of those altars is permanently dedicated to England and back home and my roots and stuff.
Yeah, right.
So it's got, so I've got like some water there that's from Glastonbury, like Chalice Well, which is very sacred water from a well back home. I've got a little vial of it. I've got like stones from the sea, from England. I've got all sorts of different things from back home there. So it's very important. We do have very rich history back in England. My family, you can actually date my family back to the first Crusades.
Oh wow!
So quite lucky that we can go back that far. And so going back that far, our family, the oldest ancestor that we know of was actually an Italian priest who went over to the Crusades, but then ended up converting to Judaism.
Oh, wow.
And then got exiled and ran away to France. So so we have a family museum in France, and in Dunmartin, and there's this whole very rich history of how Judaism and Kabbalah sort of all intertwined into our family roots on my mother's side. But in relation to England, we do have a very rich magical history. We've got our Celts, we've got our Druids. There's a very, very old tradition there of paganism, and paganism is still incredibly prominent in England today, all over the country. And the type of paganism and also the type of witchcraft is very different from one area of the country to the next. So different counties, different villages and stuff like this have their own particular types of practices. So so it's very beautiful. It's very heavily interwoven. There's still people that get together and celebrate Beltane or May Day. I remember even celebrating May Day with the big maypoles when I was a kid. At the time I didn't realize that this maypole was in relation to a fertility festival, and that the red ribbon was the menstrual blood, and that the white blood was the semen. And it's this idea of this whole fertility ritual that's very ancient that used to be done. These sort of practices still happen all the time.
Well, that's what's so interesting about there. It's still alive because it hasn't been disconnected. And probably a lot of people do or know certain things and they don't know why, but it's actually connected to this really rich past, even though it's not as obvious anymore what
very much
behind it is.
Totally. So it's very old. I mean, the interesting thing is that even as time has progressed, it's still stayed as a constant. And we've got, for example, the Golden Dawn, who was a really fabulous magical society in the late 1800s, going into the early 1900s. Who were an occult society of Western mystery traditions. And they spawned, for example, from that society ended up spawning the artists and the creator who made the Rider-Waite tarot deck, even though it's not the first tarot deck by many hundreds and hundreds of years, but it is definitely one of the most significant tarot decks out there, the most popular one that most people teach with and most books are written about. And also Aleister Crowley was in that as well, and he ended up producing the Thoth tarot deck with an artist called Lady Frida Harris. And so there's a lot that came from that mystical society, and even back further than that, they had the magician of Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth's magician was called John Dee. And he was very, very influential in relation to magic, and particularly the idea of angelic magic and talking to spirits and stuff like this. So it's a very old tradition that we have. John Dee, actually, he lived right by where I grew up. So I really love the idea that I've walked in his footsteps, or we have so many old trees back home. Maybe I've walked past the same tree that he has.
Exactly. That's the history and herstory that we don't have in a Western way, at least in Australia. That's what I found quite interesting. And so coming to Australia from that kind of feeling and background, by contrast, what does it feel like here? Do you notice that difference?
Coming to Australia, I mean, I would say that there's that sense that I'm still very connected to my traditions back home, and my great grandma also, my grandma was from Switzerland, so I feel quite connected to that whole kind of alpine type of magic as well. But here, no, you know what, I have found an amazing community here of other occult practitioners and astrologers like yourself, and sort of witchcraft people and stuff like this. I've made an amazing community here, and although on the surface, it's, we might not, as you mentioned, a lot of people, they won't really sort of acknowledge their deeper roots as much on the surface. I do find that definitely things are changing, and people are wanting to look at this sort of getting back to their roots now. And I think a lot that's a whole new thing that is coming up, as I think a lot of people, you know, particularly when we're going through greater times of crisis that we are at the moment, is that when there's been great world crises historically, it has always been in alignment with also a deeper spiritual revolution that comes shortly afterwards and during the time, because it really makes people question you know, the greater, you know, workings of life. And so I think, you know, there's a sense of awakening a lot that's been happening, but Australia in itself is an incredibly rich, very profound country, you know, with its own beautiful, amazing, rich history. You know, they've got their own amazing Aboriginal astrology and their own stories and all sorts of things, and it's really fascinating. I've read a little bit about it, and it is totally fascinating. I feel very welcomed by this country and the magical community, and I'd say anywhere I am in the world, I really connect with the nature ultimately of wherever I am in the world. And so for me, my spiritual connection in Australia, it's listening to the birds sing. I remember that was the first thing I noticed when I got off the plane for my very first time landing in Australia, was the sound of the birds and how different they are to that time.
Isn't that interesting? Same. I can say that in America, I've heard different sounds, and there's like woodpeckers and things like that. And with a new ear, you really notice it.
So this is what the idea of spirituality means to me. It's essentially, it's like ecology and being a connection with nature. And so when I'm in Australia, you know, having that connection, I live right next to a creek, and I live right opposite it, Merry Creek, and I'm down there a lot. You know, I walk down there. In the summer, I follow, you know, I monitor little bird families that live there during the year. And so that for me, when I'm down the creek, that for me is my spiritual connection with Australia, with the land.
I must say too, of course, like I've been talking about the Western experience, and there is obviously, you know, Indigenous Australian culture that goes back. We used to think 40,000, but they're thinking 60,000 plus. No one really knows, but a lot of us don't have. You know, we're not taught much about that in school. There's that idea of don't culturally appropriate, and Aboriginal culture is generally very private, you know, the sacred rituals. It's such a different way of perceiving the world. Like we kind of, like, I'm really curious as well. I've heard little bits that are fascinating, and I'd love to know more. And I think because we don't have access to our own lineage, I suppose, that the thing is that opens us up more. And like as a Sagittarius as well, like I want to know all the different things, but then that's that line of respect. So I guess there's got to be like some sort of reciprocal sharing of information or something. So I'm not sure how that could happen, but it's really fascinating because they have an unbroken lineage of that long, you know, so the spirituality must be incredibly developed.
So powerful.
So hopefully one day. But on to our next question. I'm going to go back to the tarot. So can you tell me about how and why the cards and astrology are related? There seems to be a relationship between or all across, you know, astrology, Kabbalah, tarot, alchemy, and now also the newer human design. Are these systems of knowledge branches off one trunk? If so, what was the original? Like, what came first? Was it like holistic astrology, or was that something else? What have you found as a multi-passionate Sagittarius?
How do you mold it all together? Well, it's a really interesting question, actually, and it's an interesting question, and there's definitely still a lot of question marks around it, to be honest. Because there's definitely there's definitely things that are still a mystery even today. When I teach my students tarot, I teach tarot as the idea of a pyramid. So if that's a pyramid and it's got 3 tiers to it, and the bottom tier of that pyramid is divination, and so that's something that we're most familiar with. Most people are familiar with when they think about tarot. They think about divination. You know, it's what we see on our TV screens. It's, you know, if anyone mentions tarot, you automatically think about a tarot reader. You know, but tarot is so much more than that. It's such an incredibly nuanced, powerful spiritual system. And so that first level is divination, which is what most people are familiar with, but it's almost like a gateway, if you like. And then the higher you go up the pyramid, the less people, it kind of, you know, it siphons people off. In the same way, if you think about, you know, if you play piano and you start going to piano lessons when you're a kid, you know, there's only a few people who really excel and take that piano, you know, to become masters in it. You know, only a few Beethovens, right?
Yeah.
So that bottom level is divination, and then as you move up that pyramid to the next level, this is magic. And the idea of using tarot cards with magic is very powerful, because magic is very significant in relation to its practice within occult and within witchcraft and all sorts of other different realms. Magic is always inorganic. It's never organic, because magic is the idea of us doing rituals that ultimately focus our intention so that we can subtly change the fabric of reality. So, and these tarot cards, so say for example, this is the Sun card here. I don't know if you can, this is the Salvador Dali deck, which is one of my favorite decks here. So Salvador Dali was heavily into occult practices, and he created this deck just before he died. So it's quite rare to get a artist who's like a fine artist who's actually also into occult and created a tarot deck. So it's a very special deck. So the symbolism on that one is really on point. But anyway, so with magic, it's very powerful, because it helps us through focusing on this card. So for example, this card is the Sun in tarot, and it's also ruled by the Sun. So depending on what magic I wanted to manifest, depends on what tarot cards I would use.
Yep.
And so they're used as a meditation system in relation to creating this manifestation, which essentially is magic. And then the third top of that layer of the tier, this is mysticism. And ultimately, the highest expression of the cards is to get you into connection with your deepest sense of self and your connection with the universe and the divine. And it's literally just a case of sitting there and meditating on the images, because it is, and getting back to the original question, is that tarot is ultimately based on images. So when tarot was first created, well, the first deck that we know of from the 1400s that we have copies of, is that tarot when it was first made, it had no numbers, it had no names, it was literally just images.
Oh wow. Yep.
Yeah. And paper back then was so thick that you couldn't shuffle it, because it was so thick and incredibly fragile. So these tarot cards initially, they were just sort of pinned on the wall, or they were just sort of put there and looked at, rather than the playing cards that we're familiar with today. That didn't happen until paper progressed in its quality, basically, and also when the printing presses came in. And this is when tarot cards became very popular. So initially, back in the day, we don't have any original reference back from the first tarot deck that relates it to any particular type of mystical system per se, beyond the fact that in a tarot deck they do have some mystical characters, like a hermit, like a high priestess, like you know, these sorts of things. So but beyond that, initially we don't have anything beyond those images. However, later, as time progresses, there are a lot of different occult mystical schools over hundreds and hundreds of years who have taken up this tarot, and then what they've done is they have superimposed their mystical systems upon it.
Yeah, right.
Because they fit so well. They fit so perfectly. And there is a great train of thought, and it is just a hypothesis, so it's definitely not set in stone, but there's a greater hypothesis that potentially these cards go back much further than when they were first discovered. You know, sort of ancient Egypt or even before, you know. And that they were used a lot in mystical rites, and they were used as sort of a visual illustration of the mystical process of enlightenment.
Like the whole journey.
So, right, yeah, absolutely. So it's the journey towards enlightenment. So in relation to tarot that we're more familiar with today, in the 1800s, there was a French occultist called Eliphas Levi, and he was incredibly influential at the time for his mystical and occult teachings. And he was heavily into tarot, and he realized at the time that this Kabbalah fits so well, and all the astrology fits so well. And then from him, tarot heavily then started developing and started being taken up again by the Golden Dawn, who then also put their own astrological systems and stuff like that on top. So to give an idea of how that works very briefly, so the interesting thing is that prior to 1909, tarot, unless you really went out of your way to study occult practices, you would have no idea of the understanding of the mystical and the symbolism behind tarot. You'd have no idea. And as I said, tarot ultimately is based on the artwork. So I get most of my students to study art history, particularly Renaissance, because that's when the first tarot deck came from, is the Renaissance times in Milan, in Italy. And so, but initially the tarot decks, so were what we call, there's a difference between esoteric and esoteric. And so prior to 1909, tarot decks were esoteric, which means that the occult and the magical knowledge was hidden within them. And unless you went out of your way to really study occult practices, you had no idea. You would never know. And it wasn't until really 1909 when the Rider-Waite Tarot deck was published that these cards started having more familiar images of people on them a lot more.
Right.
So, so here I've got an example. So this is the Marseille Tarot deck that was developed in published in 1499. So it's very, very old, this one. And up until 1909, this was the most common tarot deck used. And then this one is the Rider-Waite, same card. So you can see in here that this person is sort of having a struggle. They're having a bit of a fight here. You would never be able to tell that in the other one. And so this is an esoteric deck, which shows that the spiritual lessons are within the symbolism, and they're clearly shown to you. Because prior to this point, there's 78 cards in a deck. And prior to the point, this point in 1909, only 22 of those cards that we call major cards or major arcana cards or trump cards were given as a visual depiction of something or a person actually happening. And all the rest look like normal playing cards. So this card here, this is ruled by Mars in Leo, this card. And so you will know Mars is very martial. It's about fighting. It's, you know, it's warrior,
it's
right?
assertive.
And Leo here is this very sort of positive, strong energy, you know, and it's being at the front of things, you know, it's showing your face, it's showing up. And so, and this is what this card is about, is the idea of showing up, which is that Leo, fronting things, showing your face, not being shy. And Mars, which is, this is about tackling your problems head on, you know? So it showed, it showed the description of it. So it's really fascinating. Whereas this card here, this is the Dali deck again. This is the Six of Wands, and this is Jupiter in Leo now. So it's very, I don't know if you can see that. It's a very different flavor. This is a chap on a horse, and he's very victorious. So again, he's being very showy, which is this Leo aspect of, you know, in the spotlight. But now it's Jupiter, and Jupiter, as we all know, who are into astrology, Jupiter's our favorite thing. We love Jupiter. It's all about, you know, good luck and abundance and, you know, wonderful life lessons. It's very philosophical and stuff like this. And it's got this great joviality to it.
Yeah.
and it wins. It's the winner, you know. So so this is, and we can see that in here, and he's very victorious on this horse. So this is how astrology is heavily linked into tarot, and each of the major cards in tarot is ruled by, each of the 22 major arcana cards is either ruled by a planet or a zodiac sign, and it's also ruled by a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So in Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, there's something called the Tree of Life, which is a diagram of the idea of the cosmos and everything within it, and all the greater lessons of life and everything you could possibly hope to imagine, of how you would spiritually evolve, and all the different stages we go through life, both good and not so great, all the challenges as well, is depicted within this visual representation. And each tarot card is related to different parts on that Tree of Life in Kabbalah, and each of those different pathways are related to different colors, different musical notes, different parts of the body. So it's a little bit like the chakra system that we're more used to in Eastern philosophy, but it's just a different version of it.
Yeah. And I guess each of these systems is a whole system within itself, isn't it, of that path? Like even the alchemists laid that out. Yeah. And astrology is the same thing. It's like that path around the houses or through the planets and the different, it's stages of a journey. But I think tarot is interesting because it brings, someone's just meshed all those things in together.
Oh, it's fascinating. I mean, the thing is that it is, you know, and this is why the importance of art is so profound, is that, you know, it's based on symbolism. So if you think about when we dream, we don't dream in words. We dream in images.
Yeah.
And you know, if I say to you the word cat, you're not going to think of the three little letters. You're going to think of the image of the cat.
Yeah.
So we think and we dream in symbols, and this is why the beauty of tarot is that tarot is basically, tarot is like a spiritual text, like any other spiritual text, except it's visual, and except that you can change the pages of the text around, so you can create these constant different stories you can create, and different and I think, you know, storytelling and art, these are very, very important things in relation to tarot, because the art is there because of the symbolism. And, you know, for example, if I said the sun, if I drew a picture of the sun, or you had a picture of a sun tarot card, on a collective conscious level, we would all identify with that image of the sun. Well, it's life-giving, it's bright. But you might also have your own personal connotation of what that sun means to you as well, individually. So we don't need words to be able to communicate with tarot exactly, because it's through images, which translates all sorts of boundaries. You know, it doesn't matter whether I live, you know, whether my native language is Mandarin, or whether my native language is Hebrew, or whether I speak English. We can all identify what the picture of the sun is, and we can all understand that. So it breaks down barriers, and this is the beauty of art.
Archetypal.
Absolutely, it's all archetypal. So this is very powerful, and the, you know, the whole astrology thing. So when I'm doing my readings for my clients, I do focus on a lot of astrology. And I just think it meshes so well with tarot, and it synthesizes so beautifully, because for me, astrology is a little bit more logistical. It's like reading a map.
It's very, it's much more left brain.
It's very left brain, right?
Yeah.
So this is this very left brain side of things. And then I find tarot is a lot more right brain. It's a lot more intuitive. It's a lot more sort of abstract in its way. And they use different sides. And I think that synthesis is very important. You know, I often get asked about people wanting to develop their sort of psychic gifts. And I always tell them it requires an equal measure of logic and an equal measure of that more sort of intuitive abstract element. And really, it's just remembering these things, because you know, we all have these gifts. You know, it's just a case of remembering them, that's all.
And listening and trusting, isn't it? Like, we all hear those things, we get the gut instincts, we all get that feeling, or we just know, and then the left brain comes in and says, there's no proof of that, so I'm not going to, that doesn't seem right, and tries to get it to fit into what they know, their, you know, your experience as it is. So that intuitive psychic yin right brain side is trying to open you up, but you don't know that yet, so it closes down. It's such a gift that I would love to see more people teach and practice and get in touch with, I think.
Well, it's very powerful. You know, I mean, this is the whole thing about the occult and occult teachings, is that much as I was saying about this pyramid that we have in tarot, there's also a pyramid in occult practice as well. And one side of this pyramid is alchemy. And alchemists are known as philosophers of fire. And then you've got another point of this pyramid, and this is astrologers and astrology. And astrologers are known as philosophers of air.
Yeah.
And then the other side of this pyramid is magicians, magic workers. And this side of the pyramid are known as the philosophers of water. And when you put them together, they become a whole. And this is the idea of earth when you put everything together. So all of these traditions are very powerful in their own way, and they're all supposed to ideally be studied together in unison. Now, because they're all incredibly dense subjects of themselves, you know, I mean, you could study tarot astrology for like 5,000 years and only scratch the tip of the iceberg, you know. Which is part and parcel of why I love it so much. It's this, you know, how could you, I'm never bored. I could never possibly be bored ever. There's so much, you know, even if I lived to an incredibly old woman, I'd still be like, oh, there's so many fascinating things to learn.
Sagittarius. Yep.
Right. Sagittarius. Totally. Absolutely. So, and this is the beauty with occult, is that it is the synthesis of both these teachings in relation to actually looking at scientific things, but also appreciating the mystical. You know, and occult teachings are sort of what the ultimate idea of that is about becoming one with consciousness and figuring out, you know, what is the point of everything. It's a little bit existential in some ways. You know, what is the greater meaning of life, and how do we connect with this greater source, and how do we invoke that within ourselves, you know, because essentially we are all stardust. And so as much as, you know, I'm stardust and I'm made of exactly the same stardust that the tree is outside my garden window, it's just that our DNA is programmed differently. It's like a great sort of cosmic computer programming system.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating, really. And the fact that, you know, a higher vibration, scientifically, a higher vibration, it always takes a higher vibration to create a lower vibration. So say, for example, in color theory, blue vibrates at a very high frequency. So blue can make red, but red, because it vibrates lower, can't make blue. So it's this idea that there's this sort of higher power, if you like, or this higher consciousness that is very intelligent, you know.
Yeah, so I guess it's like getting the spectrum, like getting in touch with the spectrum. Like the colors make me think of how we talk about the chakras. You know, you do need base chakra strong,
right?
The red and the black, but you also it's the whole spectrum, color spectrum, the rainbow, and then you need those higher vibrations. But it's like I guess connecting earth and sky and yin and yang. It's like the two sides of your brain in balance, like you were saying, like. That visual and the rational, like it's about finding balance, isn't it? And not that, I guess we've come from this Christian ideal of ditching the physical and just being this, you know, this side rather than the whole thing. Yeah.
So we became very sort of logical, if you like, and this sense of not using or cutting off one side of our brain has taken, you know, it's taken away a lot of people's natural power, really, natural agents in the world.
I'll agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the other thing is about this is that it's so empowering. You know, I can definitely tell you that my personal journey within all of this, it makes you see the world in such an incredibly different way. and it's beautiful. It really is beautiful, and it gives you a very strong sustenance. It gives you an incredibly strong core. You know, I think the thing is that if you're following a spiritual path, you can't follow a spiritual path unless you delve very deeply into the shadow realms as well.
Yeah.
Exploring that other side of yourself, and, you know, sort of working with, you know, we've all got our own crosses to bear, you know, but it's about turning that cross into our backbone that's important.
Yeah.
And I think a lot about the spiritual journey is being able to acknowledge and embrace and work and integrate that aspect of the darker side, or our shadow side, as well as the light as well. You know, this great synthesis. There's in alchemy, this alchemical text is called it's called the Emerald Tablet. So it's, you know, we think about green, don't we? It's on the Emerald Tablet. And this tablet, it's very, very ancient text that was found carved into stone. And this is the basis of alchemy. And they believe that it goes back to ancient Egyptian times.
Yeah.
And the god Thoth. They believe it was connected to the god Thoth. And Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes Trismegistus is basically like a version of Thoth as well. And in this Emerald Tablet is where we get the words "as above, so below." And so, which is a very famous esoteric axiom, "as above, so below." And it talks about the principle of the macrocosm and the microcosm, and how we are connected into the heavens, and how they then express themselves through us as well, and that everything is connected. So, and this is the importance of the shadow and the light, and, you know.
Well, that's definitely, I think, really needed today, as people are getting so, it's so divisive and so polarized. And I think that's one of the things I've always liked about astrology, is that it's equal. There's the light and the dark, you know, you have two sides of each thing. Like, which side are you living out, and which side is in shadow for you? How are you, you know, like Neptune or Pisces, there's the high road or the low road. Where are you at on that road? Which road are you taking? Or a little bit of both? And how could you lift the game a bit? Or how could you deal with these energies differently? And I guess every system, because they were whole systems, have that embedded in them. Whereas I think the Christianity thing was like, there's good and there's evil, like you can do this but you have to repress that, and that divisiveness came in, that split.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So it's like it's bringing that enchantment back, and that right brain back is really important, that yin, balancing yin and yang.
That's right.
Fascinating.
So, and I think, you know, finding the magical in everyday life, you know, and I mean, even in Christianity, you know, there's still the mystical in Christianity.
Absolutely.
You know, every spiritual path and every big religion, they have their secret rituals, and they have their more external rituals that they're happy to show people. And in Christianity, you know, we have offshoots of Christianity like Rosicrucianism and Hermeticism. And like, for example, the spiritualists that my family were heavily involved with, and Freemasonry, for example, as well, who my family were involved with. These are more mystical traditions. So in Christianity, tarot is heavily linked to Christianity. I know a lot of people, you know, would sort of go, "Oof, no, Christians," and turn their noses up. But the fact is that it is, though. And, you know, like, for example, you know, one of the most beautiful and most profoundest philosophical books on tarot, it's got nothing to do with divination at all. It's very, very profound text. And it's written about Christian Hermeticism in relation to tarot. And it's very powerful. Or, you know, even Arthur Edward Waite, who created the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, which is the most famous tarot deck today, as I mentioned. He was actually a Catholic mystic, and that deck is full of imagery that is about his views on the world and Catholicism and stuff like this. But it's also filled with a lot of Egyptian symbolism and all sorts of other things as well. And so are tarot cards in general, because when tarot cards first came about in the 1400s, or as far as we know, during that time in history, you know, there were lots of different spiritual paths that were merging at the time. You know, and even going back to ancient Alexandria, you know, this is when a lot of astrology was merging practices, and magical practices were merging at the time as well. So it's a very, very significant time, both of those times in history, for merger. And I think that's also what we're seeing today, is merger. And I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, that Neptune in Pisces period that we're in, I think, like the ultimate of dissolving everything in, and the fluidity of everything in so many different areas. The boundaries are dissolving, and it's a very interesting time to be into any of this stuff, you know. And people, like you were saying, even about Australians, you know, it was pretty dry here, but that since that Neptune went into Pisces, the modern mystic thing has become huge. People are interested. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
I was going to just go back to the Jupiter thing. You mentioned Jupiter before.
Oh, yes.
And you've just started, among your many quests, you've just started hand poke tattooing, and you've I can see it in the frame now.
Yeah,
you put Jupiter on your. So tell us about that and what you aim to do with the glyph for Jupiter.
Yeah, well, you know, I have been, I mean, I've studied fine art for many years, and I paint quite a lot, and I draw quite a lot. But it's funny because I never really painted or drew that much as a kid, really. And it's funny because it's actually tarot that got me into artwork, and so I didn't even know I could draw or paint when I was younger.
I'll intercept here. Natalie wasn't doing artwork, and then Natta Jain, was doing art. She just started doing artwork, and show us your owl. Like, it's like this.
Actually, that's a gift. So
that's the gift. But yeah, beautiful artwork. Like, it reminds us that we all have so many talents that we're probably not aware of. Natta's been doing, if you check out her Instagram, just the most beautiful birds and all sorts of things. And we were like, where did this come from?
Thank you, my love. Thank you. It's all inspired by tarot. So all of my artwork is inspired by occult and magical things, and storytelling and folklore. And, you know, storytelling's a very important part of my life. My parents are both amazing storytellers, you know, and Gemini and Aquarius sons, so both fabulous storytellers. And likewise, that's what art is for me as well. It's telling a story, and it's the symbolism behind it. So after having drawn and painted for quite a long time, I've really loved the idea of the whole ritual, in general anyway, because I hold a lot of rituals, like group rituals and stuff. But so I loved ritual, and I loved art, and I loved symbolism. And I just thought, well, how can I merge these together? And then an epiphany, much like the orange.
Yes.
And I thought, I'm going to tattoo. That's amazing. So I've started doing ritual tattoos, and so that being an example there. And so Jupiter is a symbol, as I mentioned earlier as well. Jupiter is a symbol of good luck, and it's good fortune, and it rules Sagittarius.
Yes, and Sagittarius, so it's your ruling planet.
Right. That's right, and it's a very powerful symbol for me. Actually, I have a mutual reception in my between Sagittarius and my sun, Jupiter and my sun.
Yeah.
So my Jupiter. Leo, so there's
and Leo in your 10th house. And I'll just quickly tell a quick story then. Natta, you've told me about some of the things you've done with your classes, and it's very theatrical, high drama.
It is. Yes, it is. Yeah. Well, I did. I studied.
With a background in doing doing wigs for theatre.
I was doing wigs for theatre, yeah. So I trained as a child actress.
Yes.
I used to be a child actress.
Jupiter and Leo.
And and I went to I went basically, all my schools were film schools, and I did acting, and then when I got to about 14, I didn't want to do acting anymore. I wanted to work behind the set instead. So I guess I've always had that more theatrical element. So my rituals that I do are very theatrical often. And anyway, so I really love rituals. I really love art. I really love occult stuff and symbolism. How can I merge this? tattoos. Excellent. So this Jupiter, I have been drawing this Jupiter on my body somewhere to show clients for years, to say, oh, draw this sign on you when you go to a job interview, or if you have got an important meeting, or for whatever reason, if you need a bit of good luck, you know, if you're, whatever it is, maybe you're going to see your lawyer today or something, whatever, then always draw the Jupiter on you somewhere. So it was just a very natural thing to do for myself first, because I've been drawing it on me anyway. And so, yeah, so I'm now, when we get out of lockdown, then I'm now working with ritual tattoos. So for people who like looking at their astrology, seeing what symbolism is good for them. I've been researching a lot of very old sigils and talismans and charms and lots of old magical things in relation to symbols and old ancient magical alphabets and all these sorts of things that the tattoos are based around, basically.
And you mentioned as well the point that you've chosen for that. So again, you're merging all these different ideas together, which is very Sagittarius as well.
Yeah, so this point just here, in which actually I didn't know, funnily enough. So I didn't, it happened to be so, my friend told me. But the point that I chose on my hand was very pertinent, because this point, so Jupiter is also the wise philosopher, and it is the spiritual teacher, which is essentially what I do. You know, even when my clients come to me for readings, they're always like, gosh, you read very differently to other people. I feel as though I've been, you know, I've you know, it's like seeing a teacher or going to a lecturer, a psychologist or something like this. I'm a little bit more that way inclined. And this is a very strong aspect of Jupiter, those principles. And this point in acupuncture, it's related to the principle of being a spiritual teacher, which is fascinating. And that's the point I just chose. And then also, so this finger in palmistry, this finger is ruled by Jupiter as well. And so I've just got a little dot here on Jupiter, for Jupiter too. So dot for Jupiter here, Jupiter here. And this finger in Magick, so your left hand is this sense of receiving. And this finger, your index finger, your Jupiter finger, this is also your finger of power. So it's like, come here. Good luck. Come hither.
I love it. It makes me think of Harry Potter when you talk about that. And you were saying it's like a wand, but it's your body.
It is. It's an extension. So traditionally, when you hold a wand, my wand is on the other side of my room, so I shan't get it now. But let's just assume, and you know, a wand can be anything. You know, a wand, you know, I see my paintbrush as a wand, you know. So let's assume this eagle feather is actually a wand, which essentially it kind of is. And so if you're holding a wand, and this is your index finger, traditionally you would hold your wand so that your index finger is out pointed, because it's just an extension of your finger. It's an extension of your personal willpower, which is, So ritual tattooing. I'm very, very excited about this. I can't wait for lockdown to finish so I can get out there and tattoo people with all their good luck magical symbols and signs and all sorts of things, you know, which is based for them. So it's very personalized as well. So it's based on what they want to invoke in their life, and, you know, and they carry around their own, it's like having magical armor on you.
Yeah, you know? I love that. I've got one tattoo only, but yeah, it's quite, I got it when I was 19, 20. So yeah, a couple of years ago. And got, you know, the cosmic eye, the mystic eye right in the center. It's very blurred now. It's literally got the sun underneath. There's a moon. There's all sorts of things in there. There's like the light and the dark. In that. Yeah, I've told them to use every color they've got. And I've just loved it because it did have so much mystical meaning in it, which is still relevant today. And I love that idea of celebrating and focusing intent in a magical way with a hand poke tattoo as well, that it's, you know, by someone that you're connecting with, that it's that slower, more meditative, rather than, you know, in a tattoo parlor, you know, run by bikies, which is where I was.
Yeah.
But they were really respectful. They respected the artwork and the idea behind it, which I thought was interesting. And I love that idea, and I've heard of only a couple of other people doing that, and I think that it's something that a lot of people are interested in. I'm really interested in that as well.
Well, I think it's so personal,
like
right?
that. Yeah, it's so personal, and taking into those other systems as well. Yeah,
that's right. And traditionally, our bodily fluids. Sorry to get a bit graphic for a second, but I won't get too graphic. But traditionally, our bodily fluids, so in magic and ritual, our bodily fluids are always seen as the most powerful thing. So say, for example, menstrual blood is seen as the most powerful of substances, because it brings life, right? But so the thing about tattooing as well is that, when we're tattooing, blood is our life force. So it's blood magic. It's like a blood ritual.
That's what I was thinking for your Scorpio, something that draws blood.
Well, yeah, right, yeah. So it's incredibly potent. It's how we mark ourselves, how we adorn ourselves. As I was saying about these symbols, they're symbols that are in our subconsciousness. It's how we connect with things. So having these symbols in our body, particularly when they relate to what our intention is, or as I said, like armor to protect us as well as to bring towards us or to remind us of certain things, it's a very powerful way of working in the world.
Yeah, so if you're in Melbourne and it's not locked down, and you might be heading to England whenever that's possible at some point as well.
At some point, I'm not sure. We're in such a flux at the moment, aren't we? I mean, it's, who knows, really. I'm allowing myself to go with the flow of wherever it might take me. But I see myself, I'm still talking to a lot of clients, even though we're in lockdown. I teach private classes online, one-on-one as individuals. I've been doing Zoom talks and lectures. I do readings online for clients as well via video chat. So
let's go into how we can find you. How can people find you?
So you can find me. I've got my website and my Instagram. Both of those you'll find under Natta Jain.
NattaJain.com.
NattaJain.com is the website, and if you just put Natta Jain in to Instagram, you'll find me. So it's NattaJain, Natta Jain.com
and Instagram.
On Instagram,
and I'll put all of that in this show notes as well, so people will have a look and you can click on those.
That's lovely. So I offer private readings, going through people's astrology and tarot cards and feathers and sticks and all sorts of things. And I have a lot of private clients. I teach one-on-one video chat lessons, whether it's tarot, astrology, occult philosophy, witchcraft, all sorts of things, Lenimond cards, all sorts. And I also teach a year goes for 1 year. It's like 26 lessons all up, one every fortnight. I teach a whole year course in witchcraft, where you're then, at the end of it, you are ritually initiated as a witch.
Wow.
So I teach a few different things. I teach magical herbalism as well. Definitely keeps me out of trouble. Keeps me very busy.
Sounds like you've brought Hogwarts to Australia.
Yeah. I do love reading, don't get me wrong, but teaching is my greatest passion.
Yeah, you
absolutely
are
love
such
teaching.
a natural teacher, which is also why I wanted to get you on here and share you. Such a natural teacher, and you got really straight into it very quickly. I remember having a chat with you and my second astrology teacher, also Sagittarius, 3 Sagittarians, and you two were teaching. I'm like, how am I not teaching yet? I'm just not. I don't feel like it's time, and I've just started as well, and like light up my life as a Sagittarius. It's great, but I've always sort of yeah, you getting in there and not just teaching the astrology and the tarot. It's like every time you learn something, like you're doing that circular sort of teach and learn. Yeah, and once one gets into that cycle, it's just so exciting.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's honestly, it is, I think it just gives me the greatest amount of joy.
Yeah.
You know, and it's very humbling as well, you know, watching your students bloom. It's so humbling. And, you know, and they teach me as much as I teach them. You know, I really also, you know, the other thing I really do believe in is that as a teacher, my priority with all my students is that I want to teach you so that you far exceed me and where I am
like
today. That's my priority as a teacher, is that you need to bypass me and exceed far past where I am. And I think that's always very important when you're teaching. You know, and I go very in depth with my students. I want to share everything with them, you know. So there's definitely times, right? Yeah, there's definitely times when my classes go over time, for sure. I've gone off on some wild tangents, and you know.
But that's Sag as well. I think that's why Sag is the natural teacher, because it involves a lot of generosity, and you have to have that generosity of I need to lift you up, and I want you to fly, you know. So
that's right. Yeah, it's amazing. I was very nervous. I mean, I've been teaching for about 7 years now, something like that, maybe a bit longer. And I'd had students, not students, I'd had like clients who come to me for readings, and also friends. I had people who know me, ask me for years to teach.
Yeah.
And I'd always sort of procrastinated about it and put it off a little bit, because mainly because I just felt a bit anxious and a bit daunted about, you know, being in front of all these little eager faces and, you know, going, oh gosh, I felt a bit anxious about that sense of being in front of the camera. You know, I always get a bit anxious in front of the camera. And anyway, so I thought, Christ, how am I going to get over this sense of anxiousness? This is ridiculous. It's really holding me back. So I didn't tell anybody, but I thought, right, I'm going to throw myself in the deep end. And I enrolled to go and do a story slam competition.
Oh my God.
In Melbourne. And it was at one of the theatres here. I can't remember which one. And I didn't know that it was the practice warm-up for all the comics going to the Edinburgh Fringe. So everybody there's loads of people there, and everybody there is like essentially professional comedians and storytellers. And then there's little old me that gets, and I have to admit, I did have a couple of glasses of wine first. I did need a wee bit of Dutch courage. And not that I hardly drink anything, but I did on that day. And I got up on stage, and because I thought, if I go and do this, then I'm not going to have a problem afterwards. And so I got up on stage, and bundle of nerds got up on stage, and you know, you've got to perform. You're on the theatre stage. You have to, you know. So I performed, and then after that, I didn't tell anybody I'd gone. I didn't tell any of my friends or anything. And then after I'd finished that, I completely lost all my nerves about talking, because I thought, if I can go up on a theatre stage, well, I can definitely talk to, you know, a small group of students. So, and that's how I got into teaching after that. Yeah. I booked in my first session to teach people like about 2 weeks after I'd been on the stage.
And that's something great for people to remember, whose worlds are probably shrinking a lot now because of all the lockdowns, is you have got to push out. And that's certainly a lesson from a Jupiterian person. You have to push out. And then, you know, it's like, if you have no real challenge in your life, smaller things seem quite insurmountable. Like living here at the Gold Coast, it's been interesting going swimming in the waves. I was quite scared of the ocean because I didn't grow up with it. And, you know, I'm in the waves, and I hit that. It's challenging, you know, big waves coming at you. What do you do? I could die. But I felt that moment where I broke through, and because I was daily going and sort of like battling the waves, the rest of life seemed quite easy, and I was growing my confidence. And same with people that maybe work out at the gym or go running. It's like, it's such a challenge. Everything else seems quite easy. So your way of doing that is massive personal challenge, but it's true, isn't it? And I just want to highlight for people watching or listening, challenge yourself. Don't allow the walls to shrink in. Don't allow you, and this is so Sagittarius, isn't it? Don't allow things to shrink. Like, make sure you're expanding your horizons and your world and growing.
That's right. I think it's so important, and as you said, especially right now.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people. I mean, I'm a lot of, obviously, my clients who I'm talking to, we're all going through this greater. I really see it as like a collective dark night of the soul.
Same.
Existential
crisis, I've been calling
it. Exactly, it's a massive existential crisis, huge, a global one, and obviously it affects all of us, but it also affects us individually as well in all different sorts of ways. And one person is going to be obviously affected by this much more than another. And in actual fact, even though I know it's a bit taboo to say, but there's actually, there's people who are really thriving at the moment. It's not. As I said, it's a bit taboo to kind of say that.
Well, there's always opportunity, isn't there? That's again that duality. There is always opportunity in every situation, particularly in crisis, because it opens it up for other people that probably weren't having a go, and all of a sudden they've got a chance.
That's right. And and the fascinating thing about all of this is that, well, a couple of things really. One is that you can really see it, and I'm sure you have seen this as well, but looking at where the planets are above us in real time today, and then looking at where they are in somebody's birth chart and having a look at those transits and how they're impacting on somebody's birth chart, you can see it really dramatically playing out, and you can very easily see whether it's something that how they are being affected by it, where they're being affected in their lives by it. And how they are navigating that situation. Are they really struggling with it, or are they dealing with it not quite as they're dealing with it a little bit better,
like, so what are they going with it, like in the area of life, the house that say that big Capricorn conjunctions in, like, that's a phenomenal point in everyone's chart. What are you doing with that? Are you feeling crushed, or are you like, I'm going to build empire?
Sure, exactly. Yeah, very much so. And the interesting thing, I don't know if you felt this, but I definitely did. As an astrologer, I knew that there were these, and I know you would know as well, that we saw these big transits coming up.
Absolutely.
So for ages, we've seen them for ages coming up. We knew that this was going to be a major thing on a collective level. However, on the same token, though, because neither of us, nor has anybody alive, unless they're like super, super ancient, but nobody alive today has lived, unless you went through the last Spanish flu, nobody alive has lived through such a global major impact like this. And so before this happened, before that Saturn and Pluto conjunction, obviously I knew it was going to be big, and I knew it was going to affect a lot of people, but I didn't really appreciate the magnitude, because in my life I've never experienced such a global major issue before. So I found, as an astrologer, I found it really interesting, because it really upgraded my understanding of how things can happen in a greater aspect, on a sort of global economic aspect, on a geopolitical aspect, all these sorts of things, on a greater humanitarian aspect, when things are at that level, because we've never experienced it like that before.
I was going to say, it's been so interesting, as astrologers, because we understand everything is a cycle, and we can look at back at the cycle, cycling back a long time and what happened at those times. So again, it's like Old Testament astrology or something. It's been
totally right.
cataclysmic, and I guess we like to look on the bright side and think it's not going to be that bad, although that suggests something pretty extreme. And the other times this has happened, that particular Saturn, you know, Pluto conjunction, and then there's Jupiter winding it all up, has been quite extreme. I've been suggesting people read Cosmos and Psyche to understand those things more by Richard Harness. But I'll have to say for me, because I do look on the bright side a lot, I felt into the year, I've mentioned this on a few of these before, I felt into the year and it felt really bad. And I'm like, oh no, like for the collective. I felt in for myself and it felt fine. It was just like, it's a no fun year, it's just work, although I could tell I was going to really enjoy working. But collectively tuning in was on a different level, and I felt a lot of like serious fear and contraction, and that's what this has been for a lot of people. So that's where there's the astrology, and then there's that yin way. So did you do that? Did you kind of, I only felt in because I had to do a year forecast on something that I'm part of. Otherwise I wouldn't have done that or probably known.
Well, from the astrology, you know, I mean, as you know, you see it there, you see it coming up, don't you?
And we're all talking about it, and all the astrologers were starting to mention this. Yeah.
You know, and it is this kind of, you know it's there, right? It's this looming thing. And so I definitely had been looking into it, for sure. However, on a you know, we're talking about that more logical sort of aspect, that left brain, right brain thing. So in an astrological sense, I've been looking at the data, I've been looking at past transits and all these sorts of things. But in a sort of more, you know, more sort of abstract, tarot-esque kind of Piscean, sort of more mystical concept. I just really instinctually, towards the end of last year, I had started saying and started talking about the fact that I just really needed some extra time, and I felt as though I was going to change my life dramatically the next year, and that I was going to come into my home a lot more, and that and that in actual fact maybe the really funny thing is that I had been saying that I had a conversation with a friend, and we had been arranging for the whole time that first lockdown happened. We had been arranging that I was going to stay at hers anyway for that entire time.
Oh wow!
And we'd started talking that, like around sort of, you know, like just year. And then and then from me staying at hers, the idea is that I was just going to sort of figure out where I was at life and then decide my next life course. But essentially I was going to take a sabbatical. When we had the first COVID, to my friend's house. I didn't know obviously that COVID was going to happen, but I knew that there was this huge transit, and I was just like, I'm going to go and take a sabbatical during that time to this particular friend's. And then obviously COVID happened. And then my friend, this friend, dear friend of mine, was like, I had a dream about her, and it woke me up in the middle of the night, and I sat up, and I heard her say, so a lot of people, you know, they talk about people being clairvoyant and they see things. I've always been clairaudient, so I hear things, which makes me sound a little bit crazy. I appreciate that. But whatever. And so I hear things. So I woke up in the middle of the night, and I heard my friend say to me, and I sat up bolt upright in bed. My friend say to me, you must come and stay at mine. And then I thought, oh, this is silly. It's like, you know, 4 or 5 in the morning. I'm just going to go to bed and go back to bed. And then 2 days later, my friend called, and she said, well, you must come and stay now that COVID is happening. And I just said, yes, you're right. And so the first COVID, I went and stayed with my friend out near the Yarra Ranges for 3 months. You know, and so it's almost like I knew that a sabbatical was coming.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when this COVID initially, when we as soon as I saw in the very first report, I saw like beginning of January or middle of January or something like this in the paper. Oh, there's a flu that's going around China. It was just like, it's so kind of just a little thing, you know, just, you know, way down on the page of news, you know, not headline, just there's a little bit of a flu going around in China. It's quite a few people who are not feeling great. And as soon as I read that, I thought, oh gosh, Saturn, Pluto, oh, this is going to get like super intense.
Yep.
2 maleficent planets.
Yep.
And I called my mum and I said to my mum, I was like, Mum, I'm not being funny. I know I'm going to sound like a total nutcase. But I really just think that, you know, you want to be really careful. I think this is going to get out of hand. I'd spoken to quite a few people about this as well, like friends and stuff. I had quite a few people tell me that I was going crazy and that I was having like some nervous breakdown or something. And I was just like, okay. I was like, well, unfortunately, I think you'll find like by this time next month, we're going to be having a very different conversation. Unfortunately, I hope I'm wrong. I want to be wrong, but unfortunately, I'm not sure I will be. So, and likewise, you know, I was saying that, you know, first week of July, I was like, what will happen? I was like, this is when this kind of, we're going to come out of lockdown when Saturn moves into Aquarius. We're going to go back, and then the riots, right? Aquarius, so revolutionary, you know, renegade. And then and the collective, right? And the force of the collective, the force of the power to the people, right? Aquarius. And then Saturn in Capricorn, the government, the structures, you know, the discipline, the lockdown. I was like, first week of July, we'll be back in. And we were. Yeah. So this is the thing. And that's going to be there towards the end of the year now. So until it goes back into Aquarius. So I'm really, it's fascinating. You know, I would say, if anything, and because I read for so many people, constantly seeing people's charts, and all it does is just absolutely really, really pummel down into me how incredibly profound astrology is. Like so profound. Like, for example, I have experienced, because obviously, as you know, we've got the software on our computers so we can time things down to minutes and seconds
quickly
where the planets are moving. So I mean, I have experienced a 30-year transit literally within 6 minutes. Big life-changing transit within 6, just crazy stuff. Like, you know, and that's not uncommon, you know, like, yeah, absolutely. You know, so, and the more I see clients, the more I have a look at their astrology, you know, and it's just like, before they even say anything, it's just like, oh dear, you know, I'm sorry, but I hate to say this, but I think you probably had a bit of a marriage breakdown recently. Sorry about that. Was it in May? Oh dear. Yeah, it was. Well, yeah, I know, because your secondary progression chart is clearly indicating that your moon was going through this particular area. It's a tricky area to go through, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. So it's, now, I mean, I'm just a humble little human. I don't know the greater workings of the cosmos. You know, I'm in great sort of awe of it. You know, it's, you know, how could we be? It's hubris to think that we could possibly ever understand the magnitude of whatever goes on up there. But the little bit that I see happening just makes me realize how much in tune we are with nature, and the importance of ecology, and that magic is in nature, and it is in the every life. It's in the everyday, you know? And it's fascinating seeing people, humanity, working in the natural cycle and being in tune with the planets, whether they like that so much or not.
But it's going to happen anyway, so why not become conscious of it? And that's why I think, you know, you're working full-time basically as a mystic, you know, and, you know, very psychic as well, and you're dealing with real life people in so many real life situations. You know, you're by working in this, and I find the same myself, you're just tuning and getting better and better and better at that awareness, like that yin or enchanted way of understanding and looking at things. And that's what I got from yeah, when I had to tune into the year for the collective and for me, it was different. And like you, like trusting what you knew without any proof, except that we do have the astrology, which I find very validating. You can be like, well, this is my feeling. Whereas maybe people that are living in too much of a rational way are like, they know that they want this change. And that's our clients, isn't it? They know that they want this change. They can literally say it to you. You can look at their chart and they're totally onto it, but it's like they're not allowing themselves just to flow with the changes.
Yeah, totally.
And with the COVID thing too, I've noticed, like, I think a lot of people would have been in a better situation if they had gone with their changes. Like, even for me, I'd already been really focused on getting location independent, having everything online. So if anything, you know, this is quite supporting me. Like, socially it's not, because I really miss friends. I can't get back to Melbourne and hang out with you and everyone else. But on another side of things, you know, I had people saying, what are you doing? They don't understand what I was doing with various decisions in my life. And now it's obvious looking back in retrospect, but the rational mind cannot give you that. So it's about, listening to your intuition. That's very loud. But when you work in this, you have to listen to it, and you get it reinforced all the time. So you're developing it like any skill.
Yeah, it's like going to the gym. You know, if you go to the gym constantly every day, you're gonna have big muscles.
That's
right. And this is the thing, you know, it's these are natural gifts that we have.
We all,
you know, for example, you know, it's like a turtle will be born, you know, on a particular beach, and then when it's a little baby, it will swim off and spend its whole life swimming around the ocean. And then amazingly, it will have this homing beacon that it knows how to get back to that same beach that it hasn't seen since it was a baby, but it will go there to go and give birth. And the thing is that if we did that as humans, if all of a sudden we went back to where we were born, that we never knew it was there, it would be, it's some mystical thing. This person's it's not so much mystical. These are very natural instincts that we have, that are primal, that the logical mind that we use a lot more these days makes us forget such things. So, which is part of where that OM alphabet comes in, because a lot of the time is that when they talk about it in history, there's this aspect, there's this belief that there's this theory that basically the alphabet, part of, not all, but part of the reason for it was that in Roman England, in Roman Europe, when obviously a very long time ago, Latin was used, and then they created this other alphabet. So that our language has kind of come about from this, you know, our language that we use more frequently today has come about through that route more. Whereas this OM alphabet is dealing with the more mystical side of things behind words still. Words are very powerful. You know? So yeah, I mean, as a reader, you know, I think you wear a lot of different hats as a reader.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've trained as a counsellor. I used to be a 000 operator. And so I've trained a lot in counselling. So as much as it is the more mystical, and it's the intuition, and it's the understanding of astrology, you know, because astrology, as you know, is also quite mathematical and kind of, you know, looking at different geometry shapes and stuff like this, and working out maths. So it's that side of things. Yes, it's the more academic side of things, but also at the same time it's that more mystical side of things as well. It's merger of those, but at the same time it's also being a good storyteller, because you can't be a reader unless you can weave together the stories and engage with somebody. It's being a good counsellor, because most people are going to rock up on your doorstep and they're going to be having some form of crisis or stress.
Exactly.
You know, it's being somebody's best friend, it's being their life coach, it's being somebody's cheerleader. You know, it's whatever they need at that particular time. So there's a lot of very different skills required to be a reader. And you know, and that's something that I'm very big on with teaching my students is this art of learning the symbolisms, understanding how the idea of artwork and color, and seeing the world with the eyes of an artist, but talking with words of a storyteller, but feeling compassion of a healer. And you know, so it's a whole synthesis of things, you know.
Yeah, and how's this
idealistic?
Yeah,
right, exactly.
Yeah.
So many different things. Yes.
Which is why we love it so much. It's so diverse, isn't it? It gives you a lot of broad feel to roam, and also to draw in. And what I love about it as well is, you know, especially for Sagittarians, is that it does encourage you to explore all these different things, because you can, it just, astrology particularly, just, it works well with so much. You can just mold individually into a unique system that you can personally use. You know, everyone has their own brand and it works. So that's it allows you to bring your magic to it. And I like
that's
that.
right.
Yeah.
And I love the way how it also, you know, from sort of a psychological and an archetypal element, I love the way, you know, I'm really into Jungian psychology, and I love the way how it also enables us to be able to understand a person at a deeper level. I remember we had a conversation when we were working at the astrological conference, and I was mentioning about, and I'd never actually looked at his astrology before, Nick Cave. I'd never had a look at his astrology before. And I remember saying to you, oh, you know, he must have either a lot of Virgo or a lot of planets in the 6th house, because in his artistic career, he treats it almost like a day job. It's like a 9 to 5 for him, you know, and then he sort of clicks off. And of course, when we ended up looking at his astrology after that conversation, he had a lot of planets in the 6th house, which is very in line with that idea of order and regularity and, you know, routine, right?
And you start to really recognize that those archetypes, it's, as above, so below. The key words, the archetypes, you can just sort of hear them in how someone speaks or how someone is structuring their life or not.
Very much so.
Fascinating. And as Sagittarians, we're always, you know, it's like, nothing is ever that bad, because you always learnt something, and that's makes most things worth.
Right. Yeah, there's always a silver lining, isn't there?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is the thing I think, you know, also with a lot of my clients, is that, you know, humor has always been a very important part of my life. You know, when I was a little girl, I wanted to grow up to be a comedian, but not on stage, because I was scared of the stage. But I just wanted to tell jokes. I didn't know how I was going to do that, because I was too small to really understand anything. But I just loved comedy. I love laughing, and so, you know, I'm pretty down to earth with things, with my readings, you know. I mean, even though I talk about mystical stuff, I'm pretty straight talking as well, you know.
Yeah, you are. And practical.
Yeah.
Practical.
I'm very practical. Yeah, I'm an incredibly pragmatic reader, yeah, for sure. And you know, even when my clients, you know, sometimes when they're going through a particularly tough time or whatever, you know, I always think, even, you know, I've always thought that the most powerful of all emotions is laughter through tears. I think that's very Sagittarian, right? Being able to, you know, bounce back and find the humor in things.
Yeah.
And I've always thought laughter through tears is always an incredibly powerful emotion. And so a lot of the time, my clients I'll end up making them laugh in readings.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Right? Yeah, when they're in that moment of like, completely breakdown, we'll always be able to normally. And obviously, you know, it depends on the client. I definitely don't do it with everybody. But if I, you know, you get a sense of the person.
Yeah.
And if I get a sense of the person that I'm able to go there, I absolutely will. And it just helps them in that moment. It's so healing for them, you know, and it's such a profound moment to be able to make somebody laugh. You know, I think about the Patch Adams, who was the doctor who made who you know, in real life, who went round and realized how humor and laughter really helped the kids in hospital when they were really sick, and that idea of humor. And, you know, even looking back, we think about the Fool in tarot. The Fool is like the jester. It's this sacred jester, and in Native American tradition, they have the hioka, which is also the sacred clown. And so being able to laugh is very healing. It's very profound as well.
And it's interesting. It just made me think, well, you are quite funny. Natta I guess it's, some people are just funny. Sometimes I think, are you being funny, or are you just, there's something humorous about you in a good way? Like it's all the Jupiter and all the Sag, maybe you just get this, like, I find myself laughing. I'm like, did you mean to do, are you just being like dry sense of humor? Oh, I don't know. I think it's a funny thing. And you are funny. Yeah, and also, it's interesting that, Jupiter, this, it's like the abundance code in the chart. We do all love Jupiter. It's rarely able to be a malefic planet, bringing difficulty, even when it's in a difficult situation in the chart. They say it's less than something else would be in that situation. And if that's the ruler of Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is about, it does rule the comedian and comedy and laughter and finding the silver lining and opening, I see it as the jaws of life to open something back up. It's interesting that the king or queen planet is associated with the sign of laughter. So it does, it's important. And we probably forgetting that a bit with all this Capricorn around at the moment, with the heavy planets of Pluto in Capricorn, Saturn in Capricorn, and Jupiter herself also in Capricorn. Capricorn comes after Sagittarius, where you have to pay the bill and no one's laughing.
Right, exactly.
Let's have the big party and how we're going.
I always think of Saturn and Jupiter. I always think of Jupiter as being like Christmas dinner.
Absolutely.
And it's, all this, everything, I have everything. And then Saturn,
and then you overdo it as well. You eat too much.
Yeah, I'm just going to be eating celery in the new year and cabbage and lettuce. It's like Saturn is the salad in the new year, and Jupiter is Christmas dinner.
Exactly. I actually I have to say, I love laughing at the signs and the shadow of the signs and the way they jump on like that. And a lot of the memes as well, I find them quite funny because they are making fun, and it is important to laugh. And so I do. It
is, right? It's really
you can laugh at yourself, when people make fun of the Sagittarius. I think it's hilarious because in some ways it's true. And then,
totally.
You can just, as Australians say, take the piss on things.
Right.
Yeah.
And as much as, and it's so true, isn't it? I mean, there's, and this is the thing about these archetypes, is that they have extremes of expression as well. And I could say, I've got a stellium in Sagittarius, so I've got a very heavy Sagittarius in my second house. So, which is also why, all my passions I've put into my work, and I do this stuff full time. I'm very blessed in that context to be able to devote my whole life to this. I'm very blessed for that. I definitely don't take that for granted. But having that stellium there, or this Sagittarius energy, sure, I'm the teacher and, I can talk and stuff like that. But also just owning it, I can be incredibly belligerent and sanctimonious. We've all got our shadow element.
The dogma. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? My
love
Scorpio,
judging.
Right? Exactly. Yeah, like my Scorpio moon that's conjunct my ascendant and Venus in Scorpio as well. It can very much cauterize things.
Yeah.
So we all have these shadow elements as well. But then there's the other side of that Sagittarius, which is the well, let's all laugh about that though, and that's it's a great thing. So
like all the ships sinking, you can always see the humor in most things. I find that I've got 5 planets in Sagittarius, including Jupiter itself, and I'll be in a movie and I'll think something's hilarious. I'm laughing out loud and I'm the only one laughing, and I think it was a serious scene, but it's the seriousness of it that I think's hilarious. And laughing. And I also wanted to be a comedian, but I don't think I'm actually funny. I think things are funny. Like I see the humor in
I think you're funny.
Thank you. Maybe with a good comedy writer behind me. But I really appreciate it. And it's funny. I never linked that with the Jupiter thing, the magic in laughter and being like I'd have for me personally. But Yeah, the abundance that's hidden in being able to laugh at something and see the funny side, the jaws of life, it frees you. If you can see the
Right.
funny side in it and laugh, although then the
Exactly.
shadow side of that is not getting your Capricorn and Saturn on, you're just like, oh well, haha, see ya. Pastures, there's two sides of that as well. And I've definitely laughed at inappropriate moments that should have been solemn and satin, but that hasn't gone well. But yeah, it's the jaws of life sometimes. So I wonder how comedians are doing through all of this, and you know, the people that are finding the funny side that we can all relate to, because we're all having in some ways a shared experience, some more extreme than others. You know, it's much.
Well, I mean, I think about, you know, the thing about comedians is that, you know, I mean, as much as there is that funny side, you know, a lot of comedians suffer from depression.
Oh, isn't that amazing? Yes.
Yeah, a lot of comedians suffer from depression because, you know, there's this almost like bipolar type of aspect that, you know, there's this show face, but then there's this more internal world as well, you know, and I think also to be a comedian, you're really looking at life. You know, you're really analyzing life to gain that comedy from it. And so there's, you know, I think there is this element here where, you know, whenever you're looking at life, regardless of whatever you know, you might do with that in life, whatever you might do, whatever profession you might have, or whatever your interests are, whenever you're really deeply contemplating life, I think you're always going to be met with that sense of your deeper sense of self, and you have to sit there with it, and you know, and the greater world around us, and where we find ourselves today, and you know, so I think there's always this very deep soul searching that goes on, you know, regardless.
Well, creatively, we could actually get a lot of, or see a lot of amazing things come out of this period. You know,
totally.
in that case, that's a good point, actually.
Yeah. And you know, the really fascinating thing, so I learned this in art history, is, but the really fascinating thing is that whenever there has been some major world calamity, there is always directly after it been a new art movement.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, right. There's always a new art movement that comes from the crisis.
Yeah.
So it's really, really fascinating to see. So it'll be really interesting to see the artwork that comes out of this. So say, for example, you know, the surrealists, the surrealist art movement, who all the surrealists were heavily into occult practices as well. You know, their movement came, you know, was coming after that First World War type of time, you know, and it's really interesting to see where these movements come from. It's very, very interesting. So I'd be interesting to see what comes out of this.
Yeah, because I guess they do break things down and create a real paradigm shift. You know, that's the gift and the opportunity when something else is, I guess, you know, we all know that those conjunctions in Capricorn were the end of a period and the beginning of something else. Like a lot of people are saying the dismantling of capitalism and patriarchy. So that means something new's got to come of it. But for something new to come of it, we need to create that too. Like we need to make something else blossom and not just smash something, and whatever comes, like we have to be part of that new growth and plant the seeds and water them and grow them and take that action. So I'm interested to see what's happening in the second part of this year with that Mars in Aries, you know, for 6 months when it retrogrades. That's going to be the real headline.
Also with the Chiron there as well.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, this kind of wound that is opened up more so it can be healed is very powerful. But, you know, I mean, I think, you know, in relation to the art and the creativity, a lot of people are getting creative now. You know, they have this extra time on it. They're getting creative, which is amazing. And, you know, like if you had a look in art history, you know, for example, there's some very harrowing artwork that came out of like the concentration camps, for example, in Nazi Germany and stuff. Very harrowing, but incredibly profound artwork, and you could really see what that person was going through. You know, there's a lot of artwork that came out of post-colonialism, really, again, many harrowing artworks, but really profound. You know, you can really see that. And likewise, you know, we were talking before we started this conversation today, we were talking about the suffragettes and the women's movement. There's you know, and female artwork that came out of this, you know, and how women in relation to artwork has very much changed in the way, you know, that we are, you know, in the way that we have changed within that system, you know, in that patriarchal system, in the way that women have become stronger over the years.
Yeah.
And all of this is expressed through artwork. And I am sure, no doubt, that in many years' time, when people are having a look back at art history of 2020, maybe in hundreds of years' time, they will definitely be having a look at the artwork that was made during this period. And already we're seeing, you know, lots of artwork about Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
You know, we're seeing lots of artwork in relation to the greater socioeconomic stuff that's going on today, like, you know, whether it is to do with people's gender, or whether it is to do with you know, feminism, or whether, you know, whatever, all sorts of myriads of different things, you know, the environment, climate change, all these sorts of things. There's artwork that's being produced, and it's definitely, you know, the way people are using even the materials in artwork is changing, because they're becoming a lot more sort of conscious of the environmental factors in relation to some of the artwork and stuff. What you know, a lot of recyclable stuff is being made. You know, how can we recycle our artwork or materials to make our artwork? So I think this will be a huge thing that people will look back at. You know, and a lot of the revolutionary type of artwork, you know, people spray painting. I mean, what a fantastic the statue, when they pulled the statue down, and then they built this new statue. I don't know the artist who created the new statue of this amazing black lady. I don't know the name of the artist. Or,
one of
or
the
name of
protesters.
Fabulous, absolutely fantastic. What a iconic moment.
Yeah, I love that too.
Fabulous. And this will go down in art history and in history in general. And this is very powerful, you know, and right now, and as we move forward, you know, this is we're living in a very, very special, powerful time. You know, we are, even though it's challenging in many ways, we're, you know, for the globe, particularly the environment, you know, we are very blessed to be here right now. It's such a very significant time in history.
And to be part of it as well, and to help create that change. But it does take us to create that change, rather than
that's right. And you know, words are one. This is what I often say to people, you know, it's part of being, you know, in this more revolutionary time. You know, words are one thing, but it's the action also that's important too.
Both. Even in little ways in your life, though. But get like all that visual communication, getting it out, even you know, companies and brands taking it on and replaying that. It's still changing how people see things and how we look at things. So, you know, keep it coming. I think it's fantastic. And all the voices that now have a voice, like all the women, people of color, like BIPOC people, you know, black transgendered people, you know, everyone has a platform for their artwork and visual communication and words, you know, and different voices. So that's the big game changer this time around, which I think is so exciting. And
I think the technology, I mean, I think the internet, I mean, this I feel has, you know, the technology in some ways, you know, I think technology has done amazing things, but I also think it's brought its new challenges with it as well.
Two sides. So you have to use
in the positive aspect, right? In the positive aspects of technology, I mean, it's amazing that we're all able to reach out and communicate, and it doesn't matter where we are in the world, we can reach out to somebody, and that is absolutely fabulous, you know. And that's very magical, and that helps us to be able to share and understand each other a lot more and share stories and stuff like this. Is fabulous. I mean, obviously there's a lot of dark side to technology and the internet, but on a positive sense, you know, and to be able to share information and stuff like this is absolutely amazing. You know, I remember having a conversation with my mother not that long ago, and saying that, you know, my dad passed away when I was quite young of cancer, and I didn't know, you know, we didn't have the internet then, and I didn't have access or knowledge that, you know, I mean, if I had known some of the stuff today, I would have encouraged my dad to, you know, really change his diet and stuff like this, you know.
Yeah.
And technology is such an, you know, that sharing of information is so powerful.
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting story. I'll just quickly say this and I'll start to wind it up. But my mum also died of cancer, and I was in Japan, of course, being a Sagittarius, you know, overseas somewhere, and there was no internet. It was in the 90s, and I had a feeling already, and I was you know, planning my slow way home, and I had a dream. You know, you always know in a way, there's a sense, I do believe. I had a dream that she came to me, and just the way she was, I got up the next day and said to my friends there, oh, I think my mother might have died. Like, this was such an unusual, and because of these reasons. And a few days later, my dad finally tracked me down and gave me a call, and I knew it. I already knew, like, didn't need the internet. It's just like, how much do I validate what I know from my dream? And I was pretty sure of it. Yeah.
That's such a strong lesson.
It's so amazing.
So
you always know. So I thought I'd share that. Yeah, like it's there's tools that we can use this as a tool in certain ways, but in other ways we also don't need it, and it's important not to outsource that skill and seek that validation. That's what the rational mind, don't let the rational mind dominate. It's like you have to learn to trust that intuition, and it will be validated eventually. That's the thing, as you see all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think the more in tune we are with nature and the natural cycle of life, the more in tune we are with this, with, you know, that sense of primal knowing of things. Because it's already there, it's already present. But when we're in tune with things, I mean, you're more naturally in tune with things anyway. But when we have that, then, you know, it's you know, they're like our antenna, right? It's like having antenna, and our antenna, you know, they're strong. You know, our antenna have good muscles. They're worked out. So so you know, it's I think ultimately, you know, and I'm thinking about all the type of work that both of us do. For me, when I really sort of boil it down to its pure essence, sort of thinking about it in a very alchemical way, where we would distill it down to its utter pure essence, is that for me, all of this, everything we talk about, is ultimately about our connection with that sense of divine and cosmic consciousness, and this we is in the nature all around us. And so, if anything, out of all of our practices, the most important thing I take away from everything that we do, and particularly my personal practice, is the importance of being at one with nature and looking after nature. This is the most important thing. The most greatest lesson is not like, when am I going to meet my husband? You know.
And this nature as well, this nature, this physical nature.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, this is what is important. It's a sense of how we commune with each other as a greater web, as a greater connective web, you know, and how we can create happiness and strength and beauty, and you know, how we can look after this beautiful, amazing planet.
And that makes me think too of, we can't commune with each other if we can't even commune with ourselves. Like, if we're not even trusting our own voice, you know, start here and it goes out, and
100%, absolutely.
All right,
totally.
Well, let's wrap it up and leave it on that. That is an excellent final Sagittarian statement, I think. Sagittarius is very connected to nature, the wide open spaces, and that particular kind of spirituality, I think, as well. So thank you so much for sharing
my pleasure,
your amazingness between us 9 planets in Sagittarius. And I really encourage people to visit Natalie on Zoom and get a feather reading or get some skills like you would do. Yeah, I guess that's teaching people to tune into themselves and trust that. I think is the number one essential. Yeah,
absolutely, it's really essential. So so I teach like personal spiritual development, astrology, tarot, witchcraft, occult philosophy, all sorts of things. All things. And I'm starting. I'm doing Zoom talks on like all sorts of different group talks on sorts of different things. So I'm thinking I'm going to do a monthly Zoom astrology forecast. So it's discussing the astrology for the month ahead. Is that I'm going to start doing that on Zoom, and I'm also going to start just doing random talks about all sorts of different occult or esoteric sort of matters and philosophical points in relation to magic and all sorts of things.
Excellent. Sounds fascinating. And nattajain.com. nattajain.com on Instagram.
nattajain.com.
Also Facebook, but
on Instagram and Facebook. Yes.
The website.
All right. Thank you for having me, my love.
Thank you so much too. Just stay online and I'll end the video.
Okay, I will.
Thanks.
And thank you everybody for watching.
Thank you for watching Sunshine State of Mind. And yes, tune into your modern mystic and start, from within. Definitely. And see you next time.